Today's talk is titled From Sheep to Shawls, Fair Trade in Uruguay, to be delivered by Rebecca Hendricks. Rebecca has been knitting for many years and is a great supporter of our local independent yarn store, Ball and Skein. She learned to knit from her mother and started with tiny red and white bells to decorate holiday packages. She has graduated to caps, scarves, shawls, hand warmers, and loves to work with authentic materials. Even yarns made of bamboo, milk pod, eucalyptus bark, yak down, and alpaca. When she is not plying her needles, she and Ted enjoy traveling, their two Shih Tzu, and everything about their Cambria life. Rebecca?
Hi there. I'll tell you right now, in that list is not sweaters and socks, because I grew up in Minnesota and I'm virtually never cold. So even with my Ruana on from Montevideo, I don't do sweaters, I don't do socks. It keeps me from learning the hard stuff because I'd be too hot anyway. So I stick with my caps and my simple things. I've known what fair trade is for many years. My church in San Jose sold fair trade coffee. And my sisters and I love shopping at 10,000 Villages in Minneapolis for unique ethnic crafts and wares. These shops are nationwide and affiliated with the Mennonite Central Committee. I've also heard about the blood diamond trade and abuses in the farming and production of cocoa. But in April, I was able to travel to Uruguay and learn about one of the many successful fair trade companies, Manos del Uruguay, a set of rural cooperatives and urban stores offering garments, yarns, and crafts that are beautiful, ethical, and sustainable. In preparation for this talk, you may know that I grew up in a small farm town in rural Minnesota. A special family treat every year was buying a subscription to Kiwanis Travelogues and going to the high school auditorium 4 times a year to see a slideshow and hear about someone's exotic trip to the far corners of the world. This is how we made the National Geographic's articles come to life. So although I want to talk about fair trade today, I would also like you to get to know Uruguay a little better with some of the tourist things we did, just like those much anticipated programs back in Minnesota in the 1960s. Fair trade organizations use a definition developed by FINE, an informal association of 4 international fair trade networks. Generally, if you're in fair trade, you're certified by one of those 4 networks. Trade, by this definition, is a trading partnership based on dialogue, transparency, and respect that seeks greater unity in international trade. Fair trade organizations backed by consumers and support producers raise awareness and campaign for changes in the rules and practices of conventional international trade. Since 2009, Manos de Uruguay has been certified by the WFTO, the World Fair Trade Organization, one of the 4 major networks. Manos has one distributor in the United States, Fairmount Fibers in Philadelphia. This is where any interested store or individual can order and purchase this beautiful yarn. Fairmount also sponsors an annual 10-day trip to tour southern Uruguay and visit 4 Manos cooperatives. I have wanted to go on this trip for years, but with COVID and other scheduling issues, 2024 was my first opportunity. 2 of us traveled from the Central Coast, and with 20 other women hailing from Canada, Germany, and the United States, we headed off south. We also had 3 employees from Fairmount Fibers on this trip. 25 women. I told Ted he might be happier just staying home with the dogs. So, and we did have some husbands that went off resorting, and there are many, many male knitters out there. You might have seen one of them on TV at the Olympics yesterday. He brings his yarn wherever he goes. But in this case, 25 women, a tour guide and a bus driver, Walter. I have never been south of Mexico in the Americas. So 3 long flights later, we arrived in Montevideo and breathed in the air of agricultural land along the river, or the Rambla, between Uruguay and Argentina. And I think this Rambla, now I've forgotten the exact number, but it can be like 60, 80, 100 miles between Uruguay and Argentina. So it actually looks more like the ocean. But when we got further north and went to Punta del Este, we were literally where they come together. And so there was the river side, and they called that the gentle side. And then there was the wild side, the ocean side. So this was lovely beaches, but certainly not like the North Atlantic beach or something like that. And it was beautiful. We got there in time to walk around, go out to dinner by ourselves, and enjoy weather very similar to here. It never rained, and we had a fabulous 10 days of beautiful April weather. Obviously, their hot months are January and February. So April is a real treat to go to South America, Southern South America. The next day, we visited 2 Manos outlet stores selling yarn, apparel, leather goods, and craft items. It's where I bought my ruana. And we met Cecilia, the president of Manos, and she shared their journey over the last 50 years. Shopping was a must, and we would see all these yarns actually produced during the week. Every garment or yarn has a tag with the artisan's name hand-signed and the name of the village where the cooperative is located. This helps us remind others that behind each poncho, throw, or scarf, there is a woman and a story. We create garments, we, being Manos, create garments and yarns that are beautiful, ethical, sustainable objects to go around the world. Each piece is an opportunity to help an Uruguayan woman support her family. Sunday was a trip to the Montevideo Triton Narvaya Flea Market. It is a citywide event. Everyone goes there on Sunday. And I always love looking at the food at all of the markets. There was wonderful music. You'll notice the gourds that are underneath the keyboard, and gourds are a very, very important item in South America, and certainly in Uruguay, just like they are in California. We have a lot of Californian gourd farms in our own state. We then went wine tasting. You got to go wine tasting at the Spinolio Winery before leaving Montevideo the next morning. One reason that Manos and other yarn textile companies settled in Uruguay is the presence of a company called Engra. And it is a carbon neutral wool. I worked for pulp and paper, so I'm very into wood mills. Wool processing mill. Gigantic machines start with raw wool coming in from all over the world. A packet said India, a packet said Russia, a packet said China. Uruguay can have things sent to and from countries that we in the United States might not be able to. It was a gigantic dirty end, as we call it, of any process where you take something raw and turn it into something processed. So they start from with the wool, the raw wool, and turn it into miles and miles of spotless, washed and combed wool, ready to be spun and made into textiles of many kinds. This automated factory only employs 10 people, and it was a fascinating process to view up close. As I was telling Andy and Jan yesterday, we would never be allowed to wander around like we did in a United States factory. OSHA would kick us out the front door, and they would be fining that manager I don't know how much. And again, I grew up corporate-wise in the pulp and paper industry. So not only do I know how dangerous the areas were that we walked through, and the guide and the managers were very good with us and very careful, and everyone was very respectful, but you would never be able to do that in the United States. And then that's the end result. This gets shipped out, and it's gorgeous to be made into fabric, to be spun into yarn, and so on and so forth. Again, having spent much time in many paper mills in my former life, I relished the chance to see process control and measurement systems in a continuous processing environment throughout the plant. 100 people to run this gigantic a plant is pretty amazing. And the automated control systems and equipment were amazing. I even put them on my website for my guys who used to work in pulp and paper mills, and they felt right at home. So some things are very similar no matter what the product is. We got to stay at a ranch for 3 days that was a 19th century, and it still is a beautiful resort, but very, it feels like the 1800s. Even though they have 4 swimming pools and a beautiful dining room, it still feels like when you go out to ride the horses or look at the cattle that are grazing, that you're right back in the 1880s, I think it was. It was 3 beautiful days of horseback riding, knitting, hiking. This is our little afternoon tea at 5 o'clock. And then, of course, we ate dinner at around 8:30 or 9. We took knitting classes from a woman in Argentina who I did not know was world famous for designing and teaching. And we had 3 sessions with her. I'm still overwhelmed by what I learned and what I didn't learn, but it was a real treat. And obviously we were being taught by someone that the great knitters in the group were like, "You don't know who she is?" I'm like, "I just go to the yarn store in Cambria. That's all I do." And so I was there with masters of knitting, not only the teacher, but the other women that were in the group. It was very impressive, and everyone was delightful. All right, so on to people got to ride horses. I will tell you, I rode in the truck pulled by the John Deere tractor with the Taco, the dog, running alongside. That was pretty good for us old ladies. And this is just how beautiful it is. It was truly out on the agricultural plains of internal Uruguay and was just gracious and hospitable and historical. We got to talk to an elder who took us around. They have a chapel. He rang the bell and he talked about what it was like 50, 60, 70 years ago. Truly a retreat place for people from the coast and from Montevideo to come up for a week with their family and live in one of the many, many, many buildings and have 3 meals a day and be able to really enjoy the rural agricultural, pastoral part of Uruguay. So then we went to our first cooperative. I need to find out where I am. Fraile Muerto showed women winding finished yards into skeins on a swift and winder. They added manos tags and they prepared them for shipment. So we actually got to see the end first, and you'll see a couple pictures of that. These women are able to work in their local community, take projects home to work on, and earn livable wages with benefits. So she is now, I have a small one at home. This is a little supersized. Spinning those on, and right at the left on the table, she puts the finished long skeins there and they get shipped and they'll get twisted up like they are in a yarn store later. She just has them out in the skeins as soon as they come off the swift, and she uses the winder to do that. And when Ted and I do it at home, or when Ted does it at home, because he likes that stuff, he knows exactly how to get it on my swift and then wind it into a skein, and I'll show you that in a minute, all right? One woman was spinning yarn at an electric machine, and several travelers sat down to try it because people that came with me had spinning wheels at home and were used to spinning yarn from fiber. The employees, we were really worried about going in there. This is kind of an extra. We were worried about going in there as kind of first world wealthy white women, coming in and looking at the people that are making the yarn in Uruguay. So we really wanted to go in with a real sense of appreciation and when we got back in the bus, our lovely Pilar, who was our guide, said, "I know this," because we were so excited we couldn't stand it, but we were just worried how we'd be received. We didn't want to look like gawking tourists. And she said, "You think you were excited to come today? This is their favorite day of the year. They went out and bought cookies and made biscuits and cut up little bars and got juice in plastic glasses and set them out. They are so excited every April when Fairmount Fiber brings their group down to Uruguay. So as much as we wanted to see them, we were thrilled that they wanted to see us also. I tell you, I could just cry. What people did, the gal on the left is with the group that traveled. The gal on the right, it works at the cooperative. And so people wore what they made out of Manos. And then she put the shawl on and we took a picture of both of them. So that the women, we almost all brought something that we had made with Manos yarn so they could see the creations that we had put together with their beautiful, beautiful yarn. And it is a premium, beautiful yarn. And even if you don't knit, you might drop in. Annie would love to see you at Ball and Skein. I think in the United States, other than Fairmount Fibers, we carry the most. They carry every kind of Manos yarn. I think they have the widest selection in an independent store other than Philadelphia of the beautiful Manos yarn. And so it might behoove you to just walk in and say, hey, we just want to see what they're making down in Uruguay. Okay. And Annie is a delight if you haven't met her. She's the new owner from Chris and Oz. And I know she'd be happy to say hi. And she has a gorgeous dog. We have a shop dog. So you can see it's not a fancy big building. It's kind of slump block and wood and there are doors and windows and it can be locked, but there's no heat or air conditioning. There's a small kind of kitchen and there's a bathroom. And it's out in a small village, a rural village, because that's where the women are that we want to grow economically, not in the city. So that's why we really had to go into the middle of Uruguay from the south, Montevideo, Punta del Este. We did kind of a horseshoe, and this is where the cooperatives were. Each individual cooperative is part of a large company, but still it's very much like a small local business. In fair weather, chickens wander about the yard beneath the drying yarn. In the winter, production schedules have to allow for increased drying time because there are no indoor drying facilities. So here's someone spinning, a little faster than a spinning wheel, but you still have to be very skilled. And she's doing it from the fiber, remember, that came from the factory, but it got dyed first, and now it's being turned into the yarn. Whoop, I'll save that for a minute. All right. Oh, I guess I'm ready. I don't speak Spanish, so I will give you the 10 principles of the World Fair Trade Organization by whom Manos is certified, and this is what they live by. And we saw no evidence to the contrary. They're very highly regarded as a textile certified company. Number 1, opportunities for economically marginalized producers. Number 2, transparency and accountability. 3, fair trade practices. 4, fair payment. 5, no child labor, no forced labor. 6, no discrimination, gender equity, freedom of association. 7, good working conditions. 8, capacity building. 9, promote fair trade. And 10, climate action and protection of the environment. Manos cooperatives, this just warms the cockles of my heart, I have to tell you. Manos cooperatives provides health insurance, retirement pensions, paid vacations, paid maternity leave for their members, in addition to as-needed education and a sense of achievement and self-determination. A component of fair trade is the social premium that buyers of the goods pay the artisans who make the goods. An important factor is that the artisans decide where and how the money is spent. It goes toward personal or community socioeconomic development. The decisions about how the money will be spent are handled democratically with transparency and participation. They support development in a variety of ways. One common way is to privately invest in public goods that infrastructure and the government are lacking. These could include environmental initiatives, care clinics, better roads, public schools, and water projects. While today there are kindergartens and preschools throughout Uruguay, the very first ones in Uruguay were started by Manos to provide childcare for the artisans. At some point, money is reinvested back into their businesses. They buy capital, machinery, and education for their members. After we arrived back home, we found out that one of the cooperatives was working toward installing air conditioning in one of their very humble buildings, and many of us donated to that cause. The next day was filled with color as the Dragon Cooperative demonstrated their dyeing techniques. Again, this is the Dragon. We used a simplified process with spray bottles, but their regular work is hot, heavy, and arduous. It was amazing to see what they could do in that wood and concrete building. All of the yarns are hand-dyed. They will tie knots in them and dip them into colors and then move the knots, and it creates the different colors that you can put into one skein. Wonderful, hot, but wonderful to watch them do this. The artisans use big pots heated by wood kettles, tying knots and dyeing in small batches, creating wonderful patterns. Their yarn colors are bright and wild, full of nuances and variations. No two skeins are the same. Each one is unique, a testimony of a particular moment. Keeping the traditional hand-spinning skill alive is very important to Manos, and it allows them to create unique, beautiful yarns. And here is this batch hanging out in the backyard over the clothesline. We also got to dye our own yarn. We got a gorgeous gift box from Manos in Fairmont on the first night. It was also a great box. You know, we older women love fab. My mother used to save the Harry and David's boxes because they were good boxes. So all of us, it was really kind of pathetic. As we get to dinner and they're like, I don't think I can fit that box in my suitcase, but I really want to take that box home. But anyway, a box of coffee, a package of coffee, a package of like chocolate caramel sauce, a skein of yarn, all sorts of things that we got to take home as treasures from Uruguay. This was also the day we learned more about Uruguay, and this is Pilar, our wonderful guide. I can't say I was very knowledgeable. I didn't even realize how far south it was. So when it was 10 hours from Dallas to Sao Paulo, I thought we're headed for Antarctica. And actually, we were pretty close. Pilar shared that Uruguay is about three things: gauchos, meat, and mate. Mate is the country's official drink made from the yerba mate plant. It becomes a caffeine-rich infused tea, which is brewed in a cup, made in a gourd, and sealed. Now they're using glass, sometimes pottery, with a metal spoon straw with a little sieve in the bottom, okay? So you drink through the straw, but you don't drink up the leaves because they go through the little sieve. Everyone in the country has one, along with a thermos of hot water. Oh, she doesn't have her thermos. Usually you carry your thermos like this, you have your mate here, and then every once in a while with hot water, and you stuff your tea leaves on one side and hold them with the spoon, and you pour in more hot water, and then you sip for half hour, and then you add more hot water, and you do that for 4 hours every day, 7 days a week. I mean, it doesn't matter where you go. Thermos, mate, sieve straw. Everybody. It was so cool. We got to try it. It's kind of a smoky, bitter tea for me, but there are lots of different flavors, and everybody brought some home. Truly a sign of Uruguay. Pilar's other comment was, the two words you'll never hear are, hurry up. Wouldn't that be a lovely place to live? In fact, Walter didn't speak English, our bus driver, but he was always there to stay overnight when we were out in the country. We were at hotels with wonderful dinners, always meat. They did have vegetarian and vegan offerings, I want to assure you, those of you that have alternative eating choices, but great bus driver. This country of 3.5 million people in an area the size of Wisconsin state is extremely progressive, although primarily rural and agricultural. The only airport is in Montevideo, and there is no train system. The economy and government are stable, with two highly functional and cooperative political parties. Reproductive rights are protected, and abortion and gay marriage are legal. Immigrants are welcomed and provided immediate resources for schools, housing, and jobs. Medical care is very affordable. Higher education is free. Public schools are guaranteed, even if for 3 or 4 children in a rural town. And literacy is almost 99%. I let Pilar know she should be very, very proud of her country. It was really impressive. At our last cooperative, I don't have pictures of this. We observed the intricate process of machine knitting. This is an example of simple machine knitting, not hand knitting. Following designer patterns, we were not allowed to take pictures. Since that day, sweaters, each taking 35 hours to complete, were being produced exclusively for Ralph Lauren. Other destinations include Donna Karan, Nordstrom's, Saks, and Stella McCarthy. It's pretty cool. To provide some fair trade history, the current movement was shaped in Europe in the 1960s. What was interesting about that is fair trade was often seen as a political gesture against neo-imperialism. Radical student movements began targeting multinational corporations, and concerns emerged that traditional business models were fundamentally flawed. I don't know if you remember, I was around back then. 1965 saw Britain launch Oxfam, a program that sold imported handicrafts in UK stores and from mail order catalogs. By 1968, the Whole Earth catalog was connecting thousands of specialized merchants, artisans, and scientists directly with consumers who were interested in supporting independent producers, with the goal of bypassing corporate retail and department stores. Every year, the sales of fair trade products grow close to 30%. In 2008, global sales of fair trade products in the US exceeded 3.5 billion. As of 2022, purchasing patterns of fair trade products have remained very strong, despite sporadic global economic downturns. Now, there have been some criticism raised about fair trade systems. One 2015 study concluded that producer benefits were close to zero because there was an oversupply of certification, and only a fraction of the stuff that was made as fair trade was actually sold on the local fair trade market, just enough to recoup the costs of certification. However, a study published by the Journal of Economic Perspectives suggests that fair trade does achieve many of its intended goals, although on a modest scale compared to the size of national economies. In the fair trade debate, there are complaints of failure to enforce the fair trade standards, with artisans, cooperatives, importers, and packers profiting by evading them. One proposed alternative to fair trade is direct trade, which eliminates the overhead of the fair trade certification and allows suppliers to receive higher prices much closer to the retail value of the end product. Some suppliers use relationships started in a fair trade system to springboard into direct sales relationships that they themselves negotiate, whereas other direct trade systems are supplier initiated for social responsibility reasons similar to fair trade systems. Back to Manos and the textiles. Making cotton and textiles fair trade does not always benefit the laborers. Manos and the other major producer, Malabrigo. So if you go to an independent yarn store and they care all about great yarn, they will either have Manos or Malabrigo as fair trade yarn. I've never seen one with both. Yes. Oh. Excellent. Well, and we would expect that from Ball and Skein. We don't know how lucky we are. It's a great store. Good. So Manos and Malabrigo are the two big ones that come from Uruguay. They've been very successful, but Africa, for example, has struggled with fair trade cotton because it has been unable to address the systemic issues that marginalize workers, not allowing them to break free of existing power relations and inequalities that cause poverty in Africa. Despite not empowering farmers, the change to fair trade cotton has had positive effects around female participation. So as we know, if we raise the standard of living for women, we raise the standard of living for the world. There's some great quote, and it's something about that. Back to the Kiwanis travelogue from the 1960s out on the prairie. Here are a few pictures of our tourist time in Oceanside, Punta del Este, and it's called the South American Riviera. Very wealthy, very fancy. Millionaires come over and build their second homes from Argentina, and it's very busy and lively, colorful. We love to go, Jan, I almost forgot. So yes, we got to spray paint. Here's my skein. It's prettier when it's out. But if you look at the chair, just coming up from the left corner of the chair with the purple and the teal and the white, that's my skein. So we dried it and we got to take it home, and I will let you know when I come to church with something made out of 415 yards of my Manos wool. This is in Punta del Este, the Contemporary Art Museum. Stunning, stunning, stunning. Just a beautiful, beautiful afternoon. It includes the studio and work by Pablo Achugari. If you were into sculpture, you would know his name. I don't, but he is a beloved, still alive Uruguayan sculptor who specializes in pieces carved from Carrara marble. And I think back in the 60s, I should have included the picture of it. He did a sculpture of La Pietà, which of course Michelangelo's is in the Vatican Museum, I'm sure. And it is a very contemporary white Carrara marble piece, and that pushed him to fame. If anybody wants to see the picture, I'm happy to email it. I started with 87 slides. Okay, so you have to know we're down to about 30, and Ted had to push me to get down there. So I'm leaving out slides, but we would be here till 2:00. We also went to this fascinating home, now the hotel and museum, of Carlos País Vilaro. It reminded me of the Sarah Winchester Mystery House up in San Jose. It was not really zoned land, so he just kept building and building and building these white buildings with no right angles, no straight lines. You're seeing about maybe a 20% of it there. One of it is a gigantic hotel for hundreds of people. And we went through his home, which is now a museum. So he was prolific. He did all sorts of things, wonderful tile work, sculptures, paintings, everything. And it was a really crazy afternoon right by the ocean. Very, very famous place. Oh, finally, the government said, you've taken up enough land, you have to quit. And so that's when he was done building. A fascinating side story is Vilaro, the artist, had a son who was a member of the infamous and tragic plane crash in the Uruguayan mountains in 1972, where 45 passengers, including 19 members of a rugby team, were downed in the mountains. You might recall many of them died. It was a very, very difficult story. Vilaro, on his own, mounted search teams and tenaciously kept at it long after people said, we can't find the crash site. They're all dead. They're all gone. For months, he kept at it. He found the crash site, and his son had survived. I will end, I bet you're glad to hear that. I will end by quoting Eloina Morales. She is an artisan and Manos production manager in Uruguay. I entered the Sarandi Grande co-op at the age of 18 to test as a spinner. I needed the job, but I had never spun. I had just watched my mother do it. The artisans told me I would be first a member applicant and later a member. That is to say, an owner of Manos. That made a great impression on me. With time, I discovered there were artisans that enjoyed working spinning, dyeing, knitting, or weaving, and then others like me that enjoyed management. For me, Manos was like going to the university. I learned to run my co-op, then I integrated the directing board, and finally I entered the production department, acting as a bridge between the manager, who came from an industrial background, and the artisan's reality. Now I'm the production manager and have made a career step by step with constant training and growth. May this long continue.